So I'll be talking mostly about this first work, Cryptography of Certified Deletion, which is joint with Dakshita Khurana. Bhaskar will come and talk about Blind Delegation with Certified Deletion, which is also with Sanjam, Garg, and Dakshita Khurana. Okay? So the basic scenario that we'll be considering is you have some client with some data that they would like to encrypt and upload to the cloud, right? So just store on the cloud. And we'll model the cloud for now as being quantum polynomial time and assume they can't break the encryption scheme. But the reason we're using quantum encodings for this is because we're going to ask for some more from the security property. And we're going to allow the client to, if they want, later request that the server permanently deletes their data. And we want to allow the server to do that and kind of return a certificate or a proof that they actually deleted it. And so if the client accepts this proof of deletion, then we want to say that that data D that used to be on the server is now completely gone. And we can capture this in a strong manner by stipulating that the server can't recover D even given unbounded time after deletion. So in particular, D is now kind of statistically removed from their view. Right, and so this scenario has been studied in a number of recent works. I'll mention a couple of relevant ones. And so these works studied a very slightly different scenario where they considered a key leakage style definition, where they model the server or the adversary as always kind of having the same resources, but after deletion, they explicitly leak the key to the server. So the first work to really define the notion of encryption with certified deletion was this work by Broadbent and Islam. And they studied this, specifically just this one-time pad encryption case, where kind of throughout the entire experiment, the data is information theoretically or statistically independent of the adversary's view, right? And then this follow-up work, so Hiroko, Morimai, Nishimaki, and Yamakawa, studied this notion in the public key setting, where they actually, gave the server an encryption of the data and modeled them as quantum polynomial time. But even after deletion, they were still quantum polynomial time. Okay, so in this work, we want to study the strong notion of kind of, giving an encryption of the data to the server, asking for a deletion certificate, and then after this, modeling the server as completely unbounded, right? And so the main quantum tool we're going to use to achieve this is by now pretty standard in the literature. It's called the subspace Coset state. So it's defined by a subspace, in this case an F2 to the lambda and two vectors, V and W. So V defines some coset in the primal space, and the state itself is going to be a superposition over the vectors in this coset. And then W will define, will be encoded in the phase and define the coset in the dual basis, right? So, the key fact about these states is that you can kind of switch between these two representations of them by applying Fourier transform, in this case just Hadamard's. So you can either get S plus V or S per plus W, but intuitively you shouldn't be able to get information about both S plus V and S per plus W at the same time. So this leads to a pretty natural idea for how to achieve certified deletion. Right, and our main compiler in both works are going to be variants of this, which is very inspired by these previous works that I mentioned. So let's sample a subspace Coset state. We need an encryption scheme, so let's just say we have any kind of semantically secure encryption scheme to use. And to encrypt a bit B, we'll just kind of give out the description of we'll give out the subspace Coset state. We'll encrypt the description of the subspace, which will allow for decryption. And then we'll hide the plain text B using, in this case, the bits of kind of the primal coset, so just these bits of VI, right? So then, intuitively, if the adversary measures the state in the Hadamard basis to get some vector in S per plus W, then they should have kind of erased all of their information that they previously had about V, and we can hope that now V is kind of removed from their view, and thus the bit B is now removed from their view. Okay. So this is all so far pretty standard from prior work. One of the main novel things we do in this work is prove a theorem kind of like this, right? So again, in both works we prove kind of variants of this, which is where we'll kind of parameterize an experiment by a bit B. We'll give the adversary an encryption of V as I just described. We'll let them do whatever they want, and then we'll we'll parse their output as a deletion certificate and then some leftover state. And so we will really be interested in the case where the deletion certificate is valid. So for the purpose of this experiment, let's just abort if it's not valid. What we want to actually claim, or what we want to prove, is that in the case where the adversary produced a successful certificate, their leftover states, whether they got an encryption of 0 or 1, are actually statistically close in trace distance. Right. So this is this is non-trivial because the distributions that the adversary was initialized with could actually be quite statistically far. Right. They're only guaranteed to be computationally indistinguishable. So what we want to show is that they take these statistically far distributions, output a valid certificate. Conditioned on that, suddenly their their leftover states are statistically close. Right. And right, so I'll mention in the specific case of this first work I'm talking about, the BK23, we're going to use a special case of subspace Coset states called Wisner encodings, or BB84 states, which are just where the subspace is spanned by standard basis vectors. And this is useful just because they're very practical, right? So they reduce to just these single unentangled qubits, leading to very practical schemes. And yeah, so I'll say a few words about the actual proof technique, or how we want to prove this. So notice that if the adversary were not given any information about the subspace, or in this case the bases theta, then it's pretty easy to formalize the intuition that for them to produce a valid deletion certificate, they must have kind of measured all these states, or almost all of these states, in the Hadamard basis. The problem comes in because we're actually giving them theta, right, albeit in encrypted form. Okay, and previous work kind of encountered this issue. And what they did is that they assumed, as a natural first step, let's remove theta from the view of the adversary. And so to do that, they assumed that the encryption scheme satisfied this special property called non-committing. Okay. And so already this is, I guess, suboptimal because it's not fully general. It's only certain schemes that satisfy this property. And another issue with this is that when they make this, then they make this hybrid switch, right? This is necessarily a computational switch. So the final claim that they show is only computational. They don't show everlasting security or statistical security after deletion. Okay. So the core of our work is kind of a new proof approach, or a new technique, where we use the security of the encryption scheme to directly show a statistical claim. Basically, we directly can show that a strategy conditioned on them producing a successful certificate must have been close to the honest strategy of measuring all or almost all of its qubits in the Hadamard basis. So the real core technique here is in the use of computational security to directly prove a statistical lemma. And I will have to refer you to the paper for more details on that. And so this leads us to a very general compiler, because ENC could be kind of any semantically secure distribution. And what we get is we just kind of plug in a bunch of primitives to this compiler and get these results, where we can achieve basically certified deletion just using BB84 states with this everlasting security notion. And so in some cases we kind of improve, we strengthen the definition of security over prior work. In other cases we achieve primitives for the first time in the plain model, right? And good. So before I give it over to Bhaskar, I just want to say one more thing, which is that another contribution of this work is to initiate the study of certified deletion in kind of two or multi-party settings, which is this stringent setting where there might be multiple adversaries interacting with each other. And so we define what certified deletion really means in this setting of MPC, right? And we call this everlasting security transfer. And this is a notion that allows basically parties to dynamically request that other parties delete their data, even after the protocol completes. So this is something that is clearly not possible classically. And I think this is interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that it gives kind of a way to see that quantum communication or computation gives you an advantage in secure computation. Previously, there's been a lot of work on showing that you can get secure computation from weaker assumptions than what are known classically. And our work shows that you can kind of upgrade these to even achieve better security as well from the same assumptions, right? And this says, despite like really fundamental no-go results, that shows you that you can't do statistically secure commitments, so you can't do everlasting secure MPC. So despite that, we show that there is a definition of security that's better than what you can obtain classically in these settings, that goes kind of right up to these no-go results, but of course doesn't violate them. And yeah, I'll pass it off to Bhaskar.
Can people hear me? Nice. So now I'll talk about blind delegation with certified deletion. So far we've talked about encryption schemes. So you can encrypt your data and then provably delete it. It would be wonderful if, in addition, you could ask the adversarial server to compute some useful function on the data. And that's the setting that we'll consider here. This turns out to require new techniques. But once we have those techniques, they generalize to a variety of cryptographic primitives, enabling us to compute securely on encrypted data in many ways, and then provably delete. So the setup is as follows. The client has a database and a function they want to compute on the database. They'll send the server a description of the function as well as an encryption of the database. Then they'll ask the server to compute on it, and at the end of this protocol, the client learns f of d. Finally, they ask the server to delete their data, and they can verify that the server has done so. First, I'll outline a construction in the semi-honest model. So for now, let's assume that the server follows the protocol as written, but they might try to use their side information to learn extra information that breaks security. So first, we will encrypt our database the same way as before. It's this combination of a classical string plus a quantum state. The classical string alone hides the database statistically. In this case, that's B. B is masked by a uniformly random bit, which is the parity of V. And then the quantum state allows you to strip off the mask. Now, how can you compute a useful function on this? Well, to make our life easier, let's imagine that the server measured this ciphertext in the computational basis. They would get a string of this form, where little s is a vector in the subspace S. Now, if ENC is an encryption scheme that supports homomorphic encryption, then this long string also supports homomorphic encryption. And it turns out that using FHE, you can map this string to another string that encrypts f of b. Now, in reality, the server does not measure the original ciphertext in the computational basis. But what they do is they'll apply this classical function we described in superposition to the ciphertext. The next challenge is, once the server has computed an encryption of f of b, how does the client actually receive that value? To do this, we'll follow a template that originally appeared in Paremba 22. So first, the server computes their encryption of f of b. They send their registers to the client. The client will use their secret key to decrypt the output register in superposition, and then they'll make a single measurement, which is measuring the value of f of b. Finally, both parties uncompute their computations to whatever extent is possible. So I claim that in the honest execution of this protocol, the state at the end of step 6 is negligibly close to the state at the beginning of step 2. In other words, none of the computations on this slide have changed the state by more than a negligible amount. To see this, note that most of the operations are unitaries, which are reversible. The only non-unitary operation is when the client measures f of b. But it turns out that this is a gentle measurement because by the correctness of this protocol, the value that the client measures is the correct value with overwhelming probability. Finally, we can use the same deletion protocol as before. Because the evaluation phase of our protocol didn't change the state meaningfully, we can essentially just use the encryption and deletion construction presented in the first half of this talk. So I said that we had to assume that the server was following this protocol. And indeed, this protocol is not secure when the server is arbitrarily malicious. They can deviate from the protocol in arbitrary ways. Here's an attack that illustrates the problem. When the server sends their registers to the client, they're supposed to send a superposition over encryptions of f of b. But what if instead they sent a superposition over these correct values and sort of with uniform weight on that and an encryption of 0? If the value of f of b is 0, then then we can essentially use the same analysis as before. This measurement is gentle because the client will measure the value 0 with overwhelming probability. However, if the value of f of b is 1, then they're going to measure 1 with probability a half and 0 with probability a half. And this will change the state by a meaningful amount. So when the server receives their registers back from the client, they can examine the state to see whether it has changed. And in this way, they can learn whether the value of f of b is 0 or 1. And this breaks security. So our solution to this problem is to have the client perform a set of checks before they decrypt and measure f of b. And these checks will ensure that the ultimate measurement on f of b is still a gentle measurement. So you can view the server's computation as a classical function that takes a vector s plus v and maps it to some output value. So we just need to check that the input is correct, in other words, that it belongs to the correct coset of s. Then we need to check that the computation, which maps input to output, was evaluated correctly. And if both of these checks pass, then we know that the value written on the output register will be the correct one with overwhelming probability. So it's still a gentle measurement. This solution requires that we use subspace Coset states instead of BB84 states. The reason for this is that we have to model the first two checks as being publicly verifiable. So we have to hand out an oracle that checks membership in S plus V. This does not break security if we're using subspace Coset states, but it does if we were using BB84 states. And finally, there's one more wrinkle, one more change we have to make to this protocol to satisfy everlasting security. So everlasting security says that after the deletion certificate is accepted, we assume that the client's secret key is leaked. So if their secret key includes S plus V, then actually B is no longer information theoretically hidden. If you're given S, V, and the classical part of the ciphertext, an unbounded adversary could learn B. So our solution is, instead of having the client use S plus V in their check, they'll use T plus U. T is a random superspace of S, and T plus U is the coset that contains S plus V. It turns out that T plus U is as useful to the client for verification purposes as S plus V is, but if T plus U is leaked, B is still statistically hidden. Essentially, the reason is that T plus U underdetermines the value of V. V still has enough entropy left in it to mask B. So this was our protocol. We're just going to make the following change. We check membership in T plus U instead. And now this is a protocol that satisfies everlasting security against malicious adversaries. Once we have these techniques, this leads us to a variety of applications. Given any of the primitives, cryptographic primitives on the left, we can compile it to add a certified deletion guarantee to it. What does this mean? Well, all of these primitives define security as a distinguishing game. They say that two scenarios are computationally indistinguishable. Our guarantee says, additionally, after deletion, those same two scenarios are statistically indistinguishable. So the centerpiece of our result is this compiler for certified deletion that takes a cryptographic primitive and adds the deletion guarantee to it. And what's so remarkable about it is it takes a primitive with computational security and upgrades that guarantee to statistical security after deletion. And that's it. Any questions?
Okay, thank you for this clear talk, both of you. So we have 5 minutes for questions. And I think somebody will help with passing around.
So I have 3 questions about blind computation. So what is the complexity of a client? So usually client ability should be very limited. Mm-hmm. So maybe in your case, client should generate quantum states.
What's the word?
Client should generate quantum state.
Oh, client. Mm-hmm. What is the computational power of the
client? Yeah, quantum, but not universal.
Yeah, they don't have to grow like the size.
Okay. So second question is, your blind scheme is verifiable. So verifiable means that verifiable. This means that client can check whether server is correctly computing or not. Is this verifiable as well? Verifiable.
Yeah.
Verifiable.
Or are you saying verifiable?
Sorry.
Are you saying verifiable?
This is verifiable?
Yeah, so the computation is verifiable.
Okay.
So if the server decides to compute the incorrect function, the client will be able to detect that.
Okay. And so what is two-message blind delegation? Two messages.
Yeah, that's a good question. So our blind delegation protocol is 4-message, I believe. So it's it's an interactive protocol.
Okay.
We can simplify this to be a non-interactive protocol. So the client sends a message, the server sends a response. But to do so, we have to use I/O.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Other questions?
So as far as I understand, it's the delegation of classical computation, right? Okay. Do you think that you can extend it for delegation of quantum computation as well?
That's a good question. Right, so our protocol only allows the delegation of classical computations. The barrier, it seems to be, can we make the quantum computation verifiable? So for classical, like homomorphic encryption, we have snarks that prove that the function was correctly evaluated. I'm not aware if that's possible for any quantum computation.
Yeah, it's harder to prove that like quantum FHE is done correctly. Right? So I mean, it's a good question, but it's not something that's immediately implied by our work.
Okay, maybe I can ask you a quick question. So if you were to, you showed some applications at the end, which was very interesting. So if you were to guess your protocol, what would be the first application of it we could see? And like a concrete application you might think of. And, how near term might it be?
I mean, first is probably just like data storage, right? Like just storing stuff on the cloud and then like later being able to delete it like that. I guess that's the most like universal application, right? I guess, are you asking for specific applications of like delegation or?
Whichever. I mean, storing data on the cloud without doing anything to it and then deleting it is not, like I don't see something very concrete. Maybe there is, but I can't think of something very concrete for it.
Oh, sure. Just beyond, using cloud as storage is already an application, right? And so you don't have to store it with yourself.
But if you can access it and do stuff with it, it's useful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but you're right. It becomes much more useful when, you're using the cloud to do delegation and so forth. I mean, I guess I could have any number of applications, but. Yeah.
So the functions you implement in the second part are pretty general, the type of computations you can do in the cloud. Very cool. Any other questions? There's one over there.
As I understand, your protocol needs a linear. I mean, if you want to encrypt, 1 gigabyte of data and store it on the server, you need to store 1 gigabyte of quantum data on the server. Is it possible somehow to decrease the amount of quantum resources to store a large amount of classical data?
Are you asking whether that's possible to?
Yeah, or if.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. Yeah, you could ask even for, there's even been other previous works that have started studying, if you can do deletion or certified deletion with just classical communication, right? Where maybe only the server, you can kind of delegate or store your data using just classical communication, but the server has quantum resources. So it seems like maybe counterintuitive, but it could be possible.
Yeah, but then you lose statistical security, I guess.
Probably, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Unclear, I guess. Yeah.
One last question, if there's any. Okay.
Really fast. I was just wondering what you meant. You said there's this lemma where the main lemma for the first work was some computational security implying some statistical lemma. So I was just wondering if you could say 2 words on what you meant by that.
Yeah, it's a situation where assuming the adversary can't break the encryption scheme in polynomial time, we can say that like kind of the state of the system after they make a measurement like looks a certain way, and that must be like statistically close to that.
I see.
That
So
way, right?
so it's like it's statistically secure, like making a computational assumption. It's like assuming this thing is computationally secure. This thing is
like statistically close to something
something that has no information about the.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Basically.
Interesting.
Okay, let's thank the speakers and move on.